Okay, so I've just opened up the file now, and I've had a look through all three of these assets. So obviously this is the one we were talking about last night. So there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about with this as well. So I'm assuming that you're calling this done by the looks of it. Okay, I'm assuming that it is wrong to how we looked at making these kind of things at the beginning. So I'm going to use this to show you how we should be unwrapping things like these basic chests, especially because it's an equidistant, not an equidistant. It's a actually that's okay. This looks a little bit squashed. Unless my eyes are deceiving me. Well, we'll look at. Obviously, we've got the video I made for making those long and kind of strange shaped chests. But I'll just go back over making the basic, perfect cube unwrap for this kind of stuff. And obviously you can look back at the video of the making those long and kind of different kind of chests. Because the VLE is up now as well. I don't know if you saw the VLE was down for a bit, but the VLE's back up. But let's talk about the barrel. Okay, so doing stuff like this is really, really, really simple. It's a very, very simple way of unwrapping stuff. It's a very simple object to unwrap. But I think what you've done is you've overlooked a couple of processes and stuff. So let's talk about the things that are wrong about this so far. Modeling wise, it's fine. It's a nice low poly stylized kind of barrel. But with the UVs, here's where it's a bit wrong. So obviously, where the thick white line, that's where the UV has a seam. That's essentially, I know you said that you find it a bit hard to understand UVs. Try and think about UVs as stickers. Things that wrap around, some objects have got, like stickers that wrap around cans, stickers that wrap around bottles, that kind of stuff. Or even clothing for an object, because clothing has a seam to it, t-shirts and hoodies and stuff. So what I'm looking at here is an object which has a seam in the wrong area. So where this thick white line is here, that's a seam, that's a separation between two UVs, two stickers. But if we look at the object, this face, and going around to this face here, so these three faces, you can think about the same bit of real world geometry, bit of real world material, because this is a plank. Obviously that's the top of the plank there, so that's the thickness of the plank, and this is the inside face and this is the outside face. So the fact that we've put a seam here is separating these two bits off from each other, when really this should be one solid UV. And by doing that, what you've done is actually made all these faces here part of the same quote-unquote material, part of the same sticker, as this inside bit here. But if you think, sorry, there's been men outside if you hear the crashing. But if you think about this top bit here, this is a separate piece of geometry in the real world. You take it out, you plug the barrel with it, and also when we come down here, you've got a good seam here. So this seam right here is good, because obviously that's the separation between a wood section and a metal section. But then you have this seam here, which is separating the bottom side, this little bit of metal here. Because again, this is the thickness of the metal. You can think about this as the same idea as the top of the wood here. This is the thickness of the metal, and this should really be with this piece of geometry here. And the same thing's happening here. We've got these two pieces separated and no seam here, and then there's no actual bottom recess to the bottom of the barrel. So what I'm going to do is just do a little bit of modeling first. So I'm going to bring another top to the bottom here. So I'm going to eyeball this a little bit, so it might not be bang on to what you've got there. So I'm just going to extrude that in, and then extrude it up like that. Okay, so that's roughly about the same kind of size. Okay, so let's ignore the UVs. In fact, let's go and start the UVs from scratch. I'm actually going to delete the UVs, so now there's no UVs to think of. So we can approach the UVing process of this step by step. And really, there's only 3 or 4 steps to unwrapping this whole thing. Number one, regardless of if you've got no UVs at all, or if your UVs are completely wacky and just like a mess, you've always got to start by laying out something to work from. So what I'm going to do is do a planar projection. I'm basically going to... Are we upside down as well? Oh, just realized... Okay, so... Look at the bottom of the screen here. I've just realized you've been modeling everything upside down. So you've been modeling like this. So... Yeah, let's just move these on top of the world like this. Always keep an eye at the bottom left hand side of the screen here and the top right hand side here. This is going to tell you where you are in space. So I can see there that I'm looking from the top. So, and remember, this is the floor of my world, so you want to make sure that everything is basically sat on top of the floor. Like that. So I'll just put those, my own kind of OCDs, put them on the floor. There we go. Right. Back to this. Also, just before we do UV, we really should be UVing and modeling in the middle of the world until we're done, and then we can move it to the side. But whatever. Right, okay, so yeah, regardless of if you've got no UVs whatsoever, so this is your UV space with nothing in it, or you've got UVs which are a complete mess, and the more complex your object, the more your UVs are going to be an absolute trash heap. We need to lay it out first. We need to lay something out for us to work from first. Now what I'm going to do is do a little bit, two different things, two different ways of projecting out our UVs. One way is just by grabbing certain objects, certain parts of the UV, and projecting those individually. So for instance, the easiest bit to do would be the top and the bottom, because they're just flat. So these are discs here, so this bit here, and this bit here, these are just flat. So when we talk about UV in flat objects, we're talking about something called planar, and planar basically just means flat. Planar, a plane of geometry. So to do that, what I'm going to do is, with those selected, I'm going to come up into my UV editor. So I've gone up, changed my workspace to UV editor, so it's easy for me. Oh, make sure I still got those selected. Make sure also I'm not under or over selecting. And this is a really good way, by the way, of making sure that you're UVing things in the right groups or the right bits. Because notice I've not got any other faces selected like this. I've only got this selected. Because if I think about this as a real world, this is a lid. This is something that is physically separate from the rest of the barrel. So what I'm going to do is go to Create, come down to Planar, and then to the option box, because what I'm going to do is change the direction in which we're going to be looking at this object. And all I've got to do is look at the object and think, right, where am I going to get the best view from? It's going to be the y-axis, looking down at the object. So I'm going to go to Create, Planar, then the option box for this, and then two things I'm going to turn on. Obviously we're looking down the y-axis, so I'm going to project from y-axis. And then I'm going to keep image width height ratio turned on. I don't know why they have this turned off by default, or even why it's an option. But what this does is make sure that the object doesn't get distorted to fit the UV grid. It maintains its physical shape. So what I'm going to do is tick that. And then I'm going to click Apply. And boom, there you go. So both the UVs for the lid and the bottom, or both lids I guess you'd call it, have been UV'd. Now remember, this one's red, because the geometry is technically facing away from the camera. The camera is facing down like this, so we're obviously seeing the blue of the top face because that's facing towards the camera. The bottom one, because the faces are facing downwards, we're only seeing the back of it. But just because it's red doesn't mean it's broken. Cool. So what I'm going to do is just move those to the side, and then just move one away from the other. So there you can see I've got the blue on top, and I got the red one, which is the bottom one. And all I'm going to do here is just flip this to be the opposite way around, so it's facing towards us. Not in the 3D world, just in the 2D world. This is something that can confuse people, and I have to admit, it did confuse me for a bit when I first started doing this. You have to think about this world on the left, the 3D world, as one universe. And then this world on the right hand side, the 2D world, is another universe. So what you do in this world, in the 2D UV world, doesn't affect the geometry here, because this is just a representation of this. The easiest way I can kind of, in a real world situation is, like, I don't know, actually I can't. There is no example of a 2D world in our 3D world, so so what I'm going to do is, boop, and I'm going to flip this, and all I'm going to do, dead easy, I'm just going to go to Modify, down to Flip, and it's good. So now basically what I've done is just flipped it. So now both of those are facing towards us, which is good. Right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do two different projections. The same type of projection, but I'm going to do it twice for two different bits. Because I've got, I've got the wood top here, and I've got the wood bottom there. That's cool. They're both wood. And technically, the outside here is wood as well, but think about it as, you know, when you're making barrels, when you're coopering them, the outside of the barrel and the lid, they're actually physically separated, physically different. They might be glued in place or something like that, but they're not actually part of the, you know, these are long planks, and that's a round disc. So what I'm going to do is go around and select all the faces for the outside wooden section, ignoring the metal section here. So I'm going around selecting those, doing that little quick selection trick. So I'm holding shift, clicking and then double clicking a face in the direction in which I want to wrap round. So like that. And obviously take your time when you're doing this. So only select the things you want to select. So I'm not selecting any of the lids, and I'm also not selecting any of the metal sections. And now what I'm going to do is do a cylindrical projection. So all the projections basically work rudimentally the very same, the exact same way. They're just taking pictures of an object. But with a planar projection, you're taking a flat picture. But with a cylindrical projection, you're taking a picture which is curved around an object. So obviously a cylindrical projection is going to be good for a lot of simple, not necessarily complex, simple cylindrical objects. So I'm going to go to create cylindrical, bang, there we go, boom. And now we've got a basic layout of our UVs. There still needs to be a bit of work done to this to make it perfect, but all in all, this is good. And you can see here that ignoring the red and the blue, because obviously we can see there are some issues with this red, but if we look for the white line, we can see there the white line is at the base here. So that's where the seam of this object is, and not up here. So all this is technically part of the same object. So I'm just going to move these to the side. I'm also going to do a save. Always remember to save often when you're doing UVing, and you don't even need to do an incremental save, because UVing is so easy when you get the hang of it that if you do end up having a crash and you've lost like 10 minutes of work, you can very easily get back that 10 minutes, and it's not actually physically changing the geometry, so we're all good. It's only you do incremental saves when you're doing stuff geometrically, or when you've done a lot of UVing work. You don't want to miss like 5 hours of UVing work, because that'll suck. Okay, so boom, that's been done for now. Yes, like I said, there is still stuff to be done here, but I'm going to go and do the rest of the UVing, seeing as well we're doing the U projection. So now I'm going to grab the metal sections, and you can see that these are really easy to grab, but I'm going to do a quick trick on these just to make it easier for us. So I'm going to grab the big front faces of each of these. So you can see I've click, shift, double click to select all the way around that. I'm ignoring the top and the bottom faces for now, and then I'm going to hold shift, click, double click. Cool, so now I've got the front faces of each of those, and then I'm going to hold shift and press full stop, period, because what that does, it grows the selection. And if I've got those faces selected here, the faces closest to it, connected to it, are going to be these thinner faces, like that. And if you want to shrink a selection, it's shift and comma. Super, super fun. Cool. So now with those selected, what I'm going to do is do another cylindrical projection. So create cylindrical, boom. And pardon me. And notice as well, I didn't actually have to change any of the settings for that because I don't need to. So boom. That's done. So now I've got all the UVs not done, but I've got them all laid out. I've got them projected, so nothing else is actually missing. So I've got my lids. My lids are pretty much done anyway. I mean, you can't perfect on a perfect circle like this. So these are actually technically done. All I've got to do now is sort out my wooden section and my metal section. So let me just move these closer together so they're a bit neater. Now this is really, really easy as well. Super, super easy. Because I'm going to do the same function on both of these to get them perfect. And the reason I want to do this function, the reason why these aren't perfect, is because if we look from the side like this, there we go. So when we've taken a cylindrical projection, or even a planar projection, we're basically looking at the object like this. So as you can see, we can't actually see the top or the bottom faces here and here because they're facing up and down. We're seeing like a cross section of them. And then all the faces that are on the inside of the lip, we can't see because they're on the inside. So what we get here is these purple faces, which is because all these blues and reds are all additive. So it's not a solid color. You know, if you have loads of blues on top of each other, the blue gets darker. If you have a lot of reds on top of each other, the red gets darker because you're adding more to that stack. But obviously if you add blue and red together, you get a purple. So you can see there that I've got a red and blue faces overlapping each other. And then in these, we can get a little bit of purple down there because of just how that's been modeled. Or we don't get anything. So we just get a flat edge there. And we get a tiny bit of purple there as well. So we need to make sure that these are actually, you know, laid out properly, unfolded properly, so that we can texture them properly. Because currently we can't texture some of these faces. It's going to give us bad results. So all I'm going to do now is just, in UV mode, I'm going to grab all the wooden section on its own. I'm going to come up to Modify, down to Unfold, and then the option box. And I'll show you why we're not going to use Unfold 3D. Unfold 3D is one of my favorite unfolding methods as a character artist. It's great for characters. It's great for organic stuff. But when we're doing anything which is a rigid body, a solid object, it's not great because it does this. So it wants to unfold the objects and have them relax as much as possible. But what this does is actually make something which is really kind of crap and really bad for us. Because these, I mean, the middle bit's perfectly fine. It's a bit bendy, but these top and this bottom C shape here, they're really bad for us because one, they're a bit of a pain to texture, but two, they take up a lot of UV space and it's very inefficient. So instead what I'm going to do is change it to Legacy, scroll down a tiny bit, just where you get to Unfold Constraint and go to Vertical. And all this is doing is I can either do horizontal or I can do vertical. The reason I'm choosing vertical on this one is because think about it as rolling out some dough. What I'm going to do, I don't need to push these side to side because the width of this is already fine. But I've got some stuff overlapping here and here, and these need to kind of unfold outwards. If you think about, you know, like a sandwich box or like a box which has a lid that you can, like a little like cardboard tab that you put in to reseal it, that kind of stuff. Same jazz, what I'm going to do is unfold that tab from behind and lay it out flat. So all I'm going to do is set that to Legacy, make sure it's unfold vertical, have them all selected in UV mode. It's important that we do it in UV mode, and click Apply. And they're done. So you can see there that all these red faces that are behind are the faces that are hidden because literally they're facing in a 90-degree axis away from our camera. Get laid out. Bang. There you go. And it also fixes some other stuff which happens from the projection, but now that's absolutely perfect. All the faces are visible. Nothing's red. It's great. So now I can just move these close together. So that's the wooden bit done. Now it's really important, why didn't I just do the entire thing as one solid group, including the metal and the wood together? Well, that's because for me, you could technically do that, but for me, I like to have a physical separation in my UVs between two different materials. This comes from when I worked, like, from the days before Substance Painter and stuff. If you wanted to have a clean separation between two surfaces and not have the, you know, pixels bleed or anything like that, you'd physically separate these two objects so that even if I texture over this, it's not going to go anywhere. It's just going to go into void space. So when I'm texturing this, I'm going to have a nice clean separation between wood and metal. Yes, you could argue nowadays with Substance Painter you don't have to do that, but we're going to do it anyway. It's efficient. Cool. Now we're going to do the exact same thing on the metal section, like that. So again, modify, unfold, option box, make sure it's Legacy, make sure it's vertical for the exact same reasons as, you know, the width wise we're good, but it's just because of the faces at the top and the bottom of each one of these pieces is hidden. So I'm going to unfold, boom, there you go. Perfect. And they're all good now. So now, if I move them closer together, what we do is now put these into the UV sheet. So this is, if you think about the difference between these two objects, a cube has very distinct edges. You know, it's got these 90 degrees edges all over the shop. You know, it's very clear where something ends on a cube. But on a cylinder, just like a sphere, there is no clear end to it. You know, there is no, like, where do I have the end of this cylinder? Same thing for a sphere. You know, where is the end and the beginning of a sphere, of a circle and stuff. So, for this, I want to have the texture be seamless. I don't want to have any seams. I'm going to make the difference between the different, I'm going to make the separation between the planks myself in a texture. But what I don't want to have is like a very obvious end to a texture there. So how I combat that is by going to UV again, selecting, say, my wooden section. I'm going to come down to where the UV space is. Let me just change. There we go. So where my UV 0 to 1 space is, this is where obviously all our UVs go. I'm going to bring this down. And I'm going to rest it just so, you know, my pivot point is in that zone. Doesn't matter if anything else is hanging over. I'm going to go to Modify. And then I'm going to go down to Normalize, which is right there. I'll normalize option box again, because, why? If I do normalize normally, it does this. So it's technically doing what I want it to do, but it's also stretching it to fit the UV grid. So I'm actually, you know, if I look at my checkerboard there, look at that lovely checkerboard. All nice and square. Perfect. If I do normalize, you see how everything stretches now? So then my pixels would be bad. My textures would be bad. So what I'm going to do instead is go to normalize option box and then just preserve aspect ratio. This is the same jazz that when we did planar projection, maintain aspect ratio. Same jazz on this one. So click that, and what's going to happen is it's just going to fit it to the widest or tallest part. So this is going to have a lot of space at the top and the bottom, but it's going to fit it in on the sides. So bang, there we go. So you can see there the checkerboard is still perfect. Nothing wrong with it. It's all good. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the metal section. So I'm going to bring that in, hover it over the zone, normalize option box, preserve aspect ratio, bang, there we go. Cool. So now I can just move my metal sections down to the bottom. This is how I generally lay them out. So my metal section is going to be at the bottom there. And then I get on my wooden sections, move them down like that. And we're almost done now, because what we've got to do is fit the lids in. Now I could eyeball these in, especially using the checkerboard. What I could do is scale these down until the checkers look, oops, there you go, until the checkers look about the same size, and I can eyeball that in. But what I can do also is do the textile density thing. So remember, textile density, if you think about it very basically, what we're using it for at the beginning, for a very basic kind of reason, is to make sure that everything is the same size. So I've got these UVs already in the UV space, and they're perfect. They're not going to go anywhere. So if I get the size from this and then apply it to these, it means that these are going to be the same size as this, and I can fit them into the UV space. And that also means that you know, you might have, if this is kind of like a 512 or a 1024 texture, this might be looking good but ever so slightly pixelated, as some kind of background props often are. But then if I still left it at this kind of size, the top would be really high res. It wouldn't match. You know, you'd have like a resolution here, but then like double, triple, quadruple the resolution here. There'd be this really weird discrepancy between the two of them. So, and it's all very easy as well. And I'll be going back over this whole process again after I've done this. So what I'm going to do is grab a piece. I'm going to grab the middle piece. Grab the middle piece there. And then in my UV editor here, in my UV toolkit, if you don't see toolkit here, what you can do is click tools, and then it might still say hide UV toolkit even if you don't see it. But it's a bit, sometimes the UV toolkit doesn't show up for some reason. So you go to tools, hide UV toolkit, tools again, and where it says show UV toolkit, your UV toolkit should come back. So transform. With this selected, I'm going to transform. I'm going to come down to the bottom of this menu where it says textile density here. Nothing else needs changing here. All I'm going to do is, with this selected, click get. That's going to get a ratio, get a number from this. And then I'm literally just going to go up to the discs here and click set. and that's going to apply this this ratio that we've got here to them. There we go. Oopsie daisy. So now if I check the checkerboard out there, everything's perfect. So now these are exactly the same size as each other. Alles gut. And then just arrange them in the UV sheet. So when we're arranging stuff into UV sheets, you always want to be as you know, space using as possible, trying to use economical space as possible. There we go, and then we're done. So as you can see, there is still some space in the UV sheet, but that's cool, that's fine. That's mainly because you've made quite a short squat barrel, so it means your UV sections are going to be quite short and squat anyway. So if you made like a really squat, so if you made a barrel, go away, that's like this, for instance, then you'd have, your UVs would be like the bottom half of this whole thing, because there's not that much height to it, but it's quite a lot of length to it. But if you made a UV like this, a model like this where it's much taller, then your UVs would fill the space up a lot more, because obviously it's tall and long. Cool. So that's the process of getting these UV'd. So let's just go through that whole process again at some kind of speed. So I'm going to delete the UVs. Boom. Start from scratch. Cool. So number one, what I want to do is UV the easiest bits. Well, the easiest bits are going to be the flat bits, top and bottom. So what I'm going to do is grab those faces like that, and then I'm going to do a planar projection down the y-axis, and I'm looking at the bottom left here. Look at the y-axis. So I'm going to planar project option box, y-axis, keep image width height ratio. Boom. Done. And we'll just move those off to the side for a second. I always clear the space because obviously I don't want to have loads of UVs messing around with each other. Separate them and then just flip the red one. So modify, flip. There we go. Good. Next I'm going to do the wood section. So then I'm going to go in face mode. I'm going to go around and click, shift, double click. Still holding shift, click, double click, click, double click. So basically go around and select all the faces that I want to be wooden planks. And then cylindrical project. Boom. Moves off to the side. And then all that's left is the metal rings around the outside. So what I'm going to do is select the front face of each of them. And then shift full stop to grow that selection so that I'm only getting these thinner faces. You can manually go around and select those. It's just a bit of a pain. So make sure I've only got those selected, and then do the same thing. Cylindrical projection, boom. Awesome. So now what I've got to do is just fix the UVs, because as we were saying before, because of the way we've projected them, obviously we're looking from one direction like this. So faces like these up here, they're literally facing it in a different 90-degree angle, so we're only going to see a pixel section of that. And then the faces on the inside are going to be facing away from us, so we need to make sure everything's facing towards us. Super easy. I'm just going to do all the wooden section first, so in making sure I'm in UV mode, grabbing all those wooden sections, modify, unfold, and then we just want to check that we've got this set to legacy and vertical. So we've been very strict in what direction these are unfolding. Then we click apply. You're going to click apply and close, but it closes the window, and because we're going to be using this a couple of times, it's easy to keep it open. But you can see now they are perfect. Moving close together, and we'll do the same thing for the metal section. Apply and close, because now we're done with it. And then move those close together. Awesome. Brilliant. So now the UVs are actually technically done. All we've got to do is arrange the UVs. And like we were saying, because this is a texture which I want to have a repeating texture, so I want to go round and round and round and have no seam, I'm going to make sure that both sides of the UV are touching both sides of the UV sheet. So I'm going to grab my metal section first, bring it so it hovers over my UV 0 to 1 space, and then go to modify, normalize, and then to the option box, just so I can make sure that the preserve aspect ratio is selected. Click apply. Nope, shouldn't have really closed that then, but and then I'm just going to move that down to the bottom. There you go. And then I'm going to grab and do the exact same thing for the wooden section. So drag that over the 0 to 1 space, modify, normalize, move it down. Cool. And now what I want to do is make sure I can get the top and bottom in, but to the right size. Because if we check the checker box, we can see this is all nice, but these are very big. So what I'm going to do is grab a bit of the UVs I've already got down here. So I'm going to grab the middle bit. In my UV toolkit, transform, textile density, I'm going to get that textile density. That gives me a number. At this point, we don't need to worry about what the number is. And then I'm just going to apply that. So I'm going to set that to these other two pieces. There we go. And then move them into the space. Nice, good. There we go. And I'm just holding X so I can snap it to grid to get some kind of, you know, uniformity, make sure they're all in the right position. There we go. Cool. And like I said, there's excess space here, so for this, that's perfectly fine. You know, you could also use this for, you know, if you're making a crate which has, or a barrel which has like a candle on top or something. You know, your candle UV could be in here. If you've got one which has got like some form of sticker on it, the sticker could be on here. That kind of stuff. Cool, so that's the barrel, and I think that's where you're tripping up. I think you're forgetting where to put certain seams, because I think you might just be looking at it as like the top being all this section, because it is technically the top, but I think you're forgetting that we're trying to represent a real life object. So really, the top would be just this bit, and then we've got a plank of wood. Like that. So that plank of wood has a top, obviously a front that we can see, and it has a face on the inside here, which disappears into obviously whatever the contents of the barrel is. I think that's maybe where you're getting yourself tripped up. And it's doing things in, you know, chunks as much as we can. Okay, so hopefully that helps. So let's move on to the crates. So as we can see with this one, like I said, I'm going to assume that this one's done, but there's a few issues for me on this. Big issues for me is you've got these frames, and these frames are a bugger because yes, you've got texture space here where it's blue, but inside here there's nothing there. There's not actually anything there to texture, and you've been stacking some of these on top of each other. So yes, that's a good way to save space, but it means that everything that's stacked on top of each other is going to carry the exact same texture. So for instance, if you've got some sort of like grimy, you know, seaweedy build up on the top face here, but then it's not here, it's going to have like a really weird seam here where it's just like this, the seaweed just ends. So what we're going to do is use this one and just go back over texturing these kind of, or unwrapping, UVing these simple things. And again, the video is there on the VLE for when I did the more kind of uniquely shaped objects. But for a simple thing like this, it's dead easy. I used to teach this a bit of an awkward way, but now we're just going to make it nice and easy. With the whole thing selected, what I'm going to do is go to Create, Automatic. I'm just going to automatic unwrap this. And I know I always say don't automatic everything. Rarely use automatic because it's never your best friend. That's because once you know how to use it, it can be your best friend. And I do a lot of unwrapping with my automatic unwrap. But it's not like when you click it, it's done. This is only one of the stages of unwrapping. And a lot of people, when they first start off, think that automatic is basically just it's done and it's laid out and it's, well, I'll just leave it alone. But it gives you a bit of a mess. Like this, you could technically texture it, but there's a lot of wasted space. Everything's been shrunk down to a size which isn't necessarily great. So, in fact, I'm just going to... do another automatic. That's better. There you go. So, I've done an automatic unwrap. And now I'm just going to think about what the object is. Now, I'm going to break my rules a little bit here. where I was talking about the barrel here of being like, okay, this is planks of wood, this is a lid, so we have to separate everything. On an object like this, that makes perfect sense. But on an object like this, it's a bit trickier. It's a bit trickier. That's because if we look at this in the real world, there are no 45, besides these corner pieces here, these corner edges. Physically, geometrically, there aren't any any angles besides a right angle, a 90-degree angle. But if we were to say to sew all, so where we are there, okay, so we're sewing all these smaller faces on the inside of this frame here, because obviously, yes, this would all be the one object. You know, this is the top of the wood, this is the side of the wood. You'd expect those to be together. So if I sew all those together, you can see that in the corners are actually overlapping, which isn't good, because then we're going to have these really weird bits in the texture where texture just kind of changes from one to another. Okay, so what can we do? Well, let's sew them together. Like that. Okay, so we'll sew them together. Okay. And you might think that's cool and stuff, but if we look at the checkerboard, we can see that it distorts quite badly. That's because we're changing that 90-degree angle to a 45-degree angle, and it's like stretching something. You know, we're stretching the texture or compressing the texture. It's not going to give us good results. So we're going to break the rules a little bit for these. So I'm going to grab all my frames and then just move them out of the way for now. And I'm looking at this. I think this might not be a perfect cube, so what I'm going to do is just make a quick create and get up to that point, because yeah, this doesn't, looking at the UVs, this doesn't look, you know, we've got some taller, some longer, and so this doesn't look like it's an actual perfect cube for us, which is a bit hard. So I'll make it a perfect cube there. I'll just quickly make a crate for us. There you go. Nice simple crate. And then do the automatic unwrap. Boom, there we go. So if I grab these frames, move them down, I'm just going to deal with these bits for now. So one of my rules when I'm dealing with stuff like this, and there are some stuff on the mirror board you can look at that I've done for other people, is when I'm dealing with this, I'm looking at the big face here, and I'm going to sew the smaller bits onto the side of that. So I'm going to come, 36 UV islands at the minute, so there's a lot of different islands. What I'm going to do is bring this down into 12. So I'm going to have one for the frame, and then one for the recess. Again, thinking about what we were just discussing about the fact that I'm not going to sew the edges here into this bit, because we're going to be upsetting that edge there. So what I'm going to do, very, very simply, each one of these little squares, I'm just going to click around the outside, select all the different sides and edge mode, and you can see there that we can see some other edges have been selected here. They basically correspond to each other, and then I just cut and sew, move and sew, boom, where they go? There they go. So I can go around and quickly add those edges on. There we go. And I was using G for last use tool there, because if my last use tool was move and sew, then if I just select the edges and press G, it's just going to do move and sew again. So that's what I'm looking at now. So you can see there that everything's still a right angle. We check the checkerboard, everything's all good, there's no stretching or anything like that. Everything's grand. Now the last little bit for this is a little bit of a head scratcher when you're not used to UVing. Sometimes the simpler objects need more of a complex UV because or need more of a complex approach to UVing because it's more commonly used for space saving or anything like that. So what I'm going to do is grab all my frames, and I'm going to modify, and I'm going to go down to stack. Where's stack? Stack similar shelves. There you go. So I've gone down to modify stack similar shelves, or even stack shelves. Stack shelves, not shelves. Stack shelves. Shelves. I keep saying shelves. There you go. Boom. So now you can see they're all on top of each other, which is grand. That's what I want for now. And then I'm going to go to modify normalize, and make sure that they just basically fit, just like I did with the barrel. I'm going to make sure that they fit the UV sheet like this, which is what I want. So now all my frames are on top of each other, and they're fit inside the UV space. And this is, I'm doing this for a reason. Now what I'm going to do is do the same thing for the insides. So I'm going to go to select all the insides, modify, stack shelves, there we go. Bring it to the middle, and then I'm going to scale these up so they're just inside like this. Now again, I am breaking rules here. Technically, these UVs are bigger than the inside UVs, so the textural density will be different, but it's not that much. And this is a space saving thing, because again, we've got this big old internal piece here. You know, this is all wasted space, so I might as well put something in here. And what better than this big square piece? The only wasted space we'll have in this whole thing is just these small little squares on the outsides, and then the separation between the inside bit and the frame bit. Okay, grand. So what I'm now going to do is say grab this top face here like this. Holding X, I'm going to drag it so it fits into the next grid like that. I'm going to grab another one. I'm going to hold X, I'm going to drag it down to the next grid. I'm going to find another one. I'm going to drag that over to the bottom right grid like that. So I'm holding X when I do this as well, so I can basically snap it to the middle of each one of these UV grids, or UDIM is what I call it. Cool. So what I've got there is a nice little layout. And now what I'm going to do is just move everything back over, so my pivot point is over the top of this section here, and then normalize. So now everything is perfectly within this zone. That's all good. Now why I did the other three bits there to make it a square is because, you know, I want to utilize the UV as much as possible. This gives me no seams on any of the corners here, which makes it nice and economical. And when it comes to texturing, you can't fit 6 sides into a square, because 6 into a square doesn't match. It doesn't work. So what I've done here is set up a kind of like some overlapping stuff. So basically got 4 different variations of a texture. So I've got like variation 1 here, variation 2, variation 3, variation 4. This could be like a lid, specific lid, unique texture, and then I could have 2 side textures, and then I could have a bottom texture, or I could have like a lid and then 3 different textures, or I could have just 4 different types of sides, where I could have like one which is like a big piece of, like a single piece of wood, one which is made of planks, one which is made of planks with air holes, one which has some sort of like graffiti on it. So I can make each one of these little quadrants a different texture variation. And this is the same way they do stuff like with Minecraft. Their textures are exactly the same as that. They'll have texture variations, and literally all they do is move the UVs around using programming language. They move the UVs around so that the UV is on a certain part of the texture for a certain thing. That's why everything in Minecraft, generally, especially in the early days, was all like the same shape square, because it was pulled off the same texture sheet. This is a very basic and similar example. And if you have a look at my Sketchfab, you'll see 2 or 3 examples of me doing that. You know, exactly the same process, exactly the same UV. And then what you can do later on is say, oh, okay, now this one I want to be this texture, and you know, this I want to be down here. You know, you can move stuff around freely, as long as, you know, if you're doing some sort of like there's some paint here which drips onto the side here, as long as those 2 bits, you know. So if I'm doing that, if this is like a bit of drippy paint going onto the edge here, what I want to do is kind of bring this one down there like that. So that can get a little bit confusing. Because that's a very, very simple way of texturing, and a very, very simple way of being economical with textures. But it's very foreign to think like that, obviously. You know, our brains aren't hardwired to think like that. And obviously I've been doing this for 20-something years, so it's in my brain. Cool. And yeah, so that's a perfect cube setup like that. But obviously for things that are not quite a cube, so things that are more like, you know, this shape or whatever, we approach it a bit differently. And that's why I did those videos of the other, you know, these longer kind of chests and stuff. I did those videos for that, but it's still the same kind of reason. It's still all about the, you know, economic UV, and the approach is still very similar, whether it be like planar projecting stuff, or you know, doing an automatic unwrap and then sewing stuff together when it needs to be sewn together. It's all very much the same for this kind of object. And then if you just try and learn from these, and then, you know, extrapolate that into what we do for the props and stuff for the scanner, you can hopefully be able to see that it's a lot of the very, you know, the same kind of similar stuff. The different with the prop stuff though is we're turning a lot of cylindrical things like LEDs and, you know, plugs into, instead of being circles, we turn them into strips like this. You know, we turn them into this so they are, you know, better laid out on a UV sheet. But again, there's tons of resources on that. So hopefully that helps. Hopefully that clears up some stuff. And the best thing about UVing is just try not to think about it too much. Do basic stuff and try and think about it as like I guess I kind of learned about it by thinking about stuff like stickers. You know, UVs are stickers for characters. If I want to hang the skin of my enemy on a wall, or if you're familiar with tattoos, especially Japanese tattoos, you'll get those Japanese back pieces that are all kind of like not actual skin, but they're all like, you know, flayed skin examples, so you can see the whole back tattoo in one go. Very, very similar. You know, everything is a sticker. You're peeling it off of the object, but then you got to think about where the seam of that sticker is going to be. Where's the best place to hide the seam so that the audience doesn't see it? Where's the best place to put a seam so you can have clean separations behind from each other? And looking at stuff as well in games, try and find seams, because especially in older games, it's quite easy to see the seam. Look at other people's work. Another thing, just look at other people's work. You know, cool. So hopefully that helps.